Nelson PASS is one of the most respected names in the audiophile world, and in this episode we're going to look at the PASS XP-20 line level preamplifier. In 2009 this would have set you back about $8,600, or fast forwarding to 2024 about $12,600. It has two pieces, the power supply for the preamp and then the preamp itself. There are both balanced and unbalanced inputs and outputs, and we'll see that in just a little bit when we do our tour of the unit. There are not a lot of specifications for the electrical performance. There are none for THD. There is one for the frequency response, which is listed at -3 dB at 2 Hertz and also at 60 kilohertz. And there's just a few other specifications, and we'll get into those a little later on in the video. So now we'll do our little tour of the front, the back. I'll pop the cover off. We can see what it looks like inside there. And then there will be test data as well as how I thought it sounded and what it was like to use. Here is a closer view of the PASS XP-20 line level preamp, as they call it. This bottom portion here is the preamp power supply, and the top portion would be the preamp. Starting on the left, we have a mute push button, and the LED comes on when it's muted. We have a mode switch, and that changes the brightness level of the display. I believe there's 3 different brightness level settings. You can go between your different inputs using these 2 push buttons. Here's our IR remote window, and I did not get the remote for this, but it does have one, and you can change all the front functions as well as a few others. And this, of course, would be your volume control. This is the rear of the XP-20. The bottom section is the DC power supply, and the AC power cord would obviously plug in there, and there is a fuse right here. And this is our preamp DC power supply cord. The trigger inputs for turning on an amplifier once the preamp is turned on are right here. They're not the standard kind of jack, but I guess you could adapt to it. These are 3-way, binding post kind of jacks. All of the unbalanced inputs and outputs are gold plated, as you can see. We have 2 unbalanced outputs here. We have 1 balanced output here. We do have 1 tape monitor loop, and then we have 1, 2, 3 unbalanced inputs as well as 2 balanced inputs. Once you remove the XP-20's cover, you're greeted with this. This obviously is the rear of the XP-20, and it kind of just gives you an overall view of what's going on with it, and kind of a little bit about all the circuitry that they're using. And this is another top view just from a different angle. It kind of gives you the opportunity to see the front control board here, or boards, I guess. And this is just a close-up view of the front circuit board, and I believe this guy right here is probably one of the unit's microprocessors, and it kind of just gives you a little bit closer view of the build quality, which is pretty good. Just another angle. I'm not sure what these pots adjust. I was unable to find the service manual, but they do have some adjustments. This big guy is our volume control knob, and you can see that our right and left levels are changing, and they turn out to be very precise 1 dB increments or decrements. Our input selection is done here. We're on input 5, and then 4, etc. Or we can go back to 4. So that's how you select your inputs. This guy right here is a mode switch, and it should be called a brightness switch. When I press it once, it makes it dimmer, and then another time the display goes away and then back to being full bright. This last switch is our mute switch, and it just puts dashes in front of your left and right volume indicators. Here's our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz. I have selected the XP-20's unbalanced input. It happens to be input number 3, and we've got our standard 2 volt RMS 1 kilohertz signal going in. I've adjusted the gain control, the volume control, such that I was as close to 0 dB. I could get about plus 0.6 of a dB or minus half a dB, and the volume setting is at 74 in this case, both left and right channels. You can see they're very well balanced, And it has great THD, better than 0.002%, about, we'll call it 98 dB SNR, and THD plus noise minus 95 dB or so. There is a specification for SNR, and it says it should be better than or equal to minus 110 dB, and we're about 98 dB, and it does say it's in reference to 5-volt output. So I'm not going to increase this anymore right now. I may come back to that in just a little bit and see if I can get 5 volts out and see what the SNR looks like there. In case you were wondering what the harmonics look like with the 1 kilohertz 2-volt signal going in and coming out, basically 0 dB of gain for the XP-20. Here we have it. You can see that our odd harmonics, the third harmonic, is less than the even harmonic or the second harmonic, which is a little surprising for a solid state amp, but that is probably what is desirable for a lot of folks. Here's our THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz using the balanced input, which would be input number 1. Its volume control was adjusted so that we have close to 0 dB gain. And in case you're wondering, our volume control is set at 68 to give us this. As you can tell, the channels are very well balanced, and our SNRs improved. If you went to the unbalanced graph, you can see that our SNRs improved by almost 4 dB it looks like for the SNRs. Now the THD also got a little bit better, like an order of magnitude better, and the THD plus noise improved by about 6 dB. So everything looked a bit better with the balanced inputs and outputs. Right now I've got the volume control set to max, which is 83. And you can see that for our 2-volt signal that's applied, our gain is about 8.5 dB. We're putting out 5.3 volts. THD is still looking really good at better than 0.004%. And our SNRs are still pretty darn good at 94 dB. The THD plus noise is a bit less, better than minus 89 dB. So overall, it looks pretty good when it's fully maxed out, although it is not meeting its signal to noise ratio requirement of 110 dB. Here's our standard THD SNR plot at 1 kilohertz for the XP-20's balanced 1 input, and I've adjusted the gain so that we're still at our minus half a dB of gain, or actually loss, and the volume control went from 74 to 68, just in case you're curious. If you compare this to the unbalanced input with a smaller signal going into it, I believe it was 6 dBV, we're a bit better SNR. We're at 102 dB, almost 103 dB. THDs are actually just a tad worse, but it was like 0.0001 something, and so who cares after that many zeros. And our THD plus noise is better than minus 101 dB, and that is pretty good. So everything really improved a little bit, other than the THD degraded a little bit when we went to the balanced input. And the reason why I'm using the 8 dBV, because if you get bored, you could always check out the C48 video and see how it performs with an 8 dBV signal going to the balanced input. They're basically look pretty much the same, pretty darn good. Here is the XP-20's frequency response from 10 hertz to 40 kilohertz. I'm using the unbalanced input, and that would be input number 3. The volume control is set for 0 dB gain, or 74, and we've got 2 volts going into the XP-20. You can see that at the low end of the band, we're down maybe 1/10 of a dB here at 10 hertz, and at 20 kilohertz, we're down 4/10 of a dB. If you go out to 40 kilohertz, we're down about 1.5 dB. So overall, it has very good frequency response. Here is the XP-20's frequency response using the balanced input, and that would be input number 1 with the volume control adjusted so that we have about 0 dB gain out of the unit, and we do have a 2 volt RMS signal going into it. If you compare this to the unbalanced input, you can see that it has a better low end. I mean, it was only down 0.1 dB at 10 hertz with the unbalanced input. So it's a little bit better. However, the channel balance is off just a little bit. I mean, we're talking, less than 0.05 dB. And at 20 kilohertz right here, we're down, about, I would call it 0.25 dB. With the unbalanced input, we were down about 0.4 of a dB. So it's a little bit better frequency response. And when we get to 40 kilohertz, we were down about 1.04 dB with the unbalanced case, and here we're maybe 0.9 of a dB. So overall, the frequency response does look a little bit better with the balanced input. Right now, I'm using the unbalanced input number 3, and I've got it terminated into shorts, and we're looking at just the system noise, which is better than minus 100 dBV down, which is really pretty darn good. And there is no specification for the system noise. Here is the XP-20's crosstalk from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. I'm using the unbalanced input, and that would be number 3. The gain was set for 0 dB of gain, and the input level was adjusted so that 0 dBV or 1 volt RMS is going into the unit. The specification is the crosstalk at 1 kilohertz should be about 90 dB, so 1 kilohertz, and we are definitely better than 90 dB. So overall, the worst case crosstalk is maybe 78 dB or so for the right to left crosstalk, but overall, this has outstanding crosstalk. Here is a plot showing the input to input isolation. There is no specification for this from PASS. In this case, I have a signal going into the unbalanced input number 3, and I've got shorts hooked up to input number 4, which is also unbalanced. I have selected input number 4, and the top plot right here in blue, that shows what input number 3 looks like just sweeping across the frequency range from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz with a 0 dBV signal put in, and the volume control on the XP-20 is set for minus 0.63 dB or a setting of 74. And then what I did is I selected the unbalanced input number 4, which is this trace here in red, and that shows you how much of the signal from input number 3 is going over to input number 4, and I'm just looking at the left channel. In this case, the worst case input to input isolation is a very respectable, we'll call it about 70 dB. Here is a plot showing the XP-20's THD versus input signal level and frequency, and the frequency range would be 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. The input signal levels are 6 dBV, which would be the highest put in, which would be about 2 volts RMS, down to minus 15 dBV, which would be about 178 millivolts. So over that input signal range and frequency, the worst case THD is maybe, 0.07%. It looks pretty darn good for the most part all across the band, regardless of the input level. I am using the unbalanced input number 3, and the volume control is set for 0 dB of gain. Here's the XP-20's multitone response. I'm using the unbalanced input, which is number 3. The volume control is set for 74, which gives us about 0 dB of gain, and I've got a 0 dBV signal going in. All that being said, this will give us a distortion-free range of between 13 to 14.5 bits. Here is the XP-20's IMD response. I've got 2 signals going in, one at 19 kilohertz, the other at 20 kilohertz, and they're going into the unbalanced input, which is input number 3. The volume control is set to give minus 0.63 dB of gain. That's about as close to 0 as I could get. And it just kind of shows that its response is really, really good. Here are our 2 tones, and what you look at are the difference tones, which would be right here at 1 kilohertz, and then you have 1 kilohertz apart from 19 120 kilohertz. So it is really good. I don't know how this would crunch out, but it's very, very low. And there was no specification from PASS on this. Right now we're looking at the difference in phase between the input and output of the XP-20. In this case, the input is the unbalanced 3 input. We've got a kilohertz signal in, and I have adjusted the volume control so that we've got about 0 dB of gain going through it. And at 100 hertz, there really is no difference. And I'm also just showing the left channel. If we go over to 100 hertz, we can see that there still is no phase change, or if there is, it's very, very small. And at 10 kilohertz, we do see some phase change. I'm guessing it's between 5 or 10 degrees between the input and the output. And now we're going to look at the phase change at just 1 kilohertz between the left and right channels. And I should point out that the outputs are connected to 47 k ohm loads for simulating the input of an amplifier. And so here we have no difference really in phase between the left and right outputs. Here is a Risetime plot, and this is still just the left channel. There's no specification for it, but it's showing a rise time of about 5.11 microseconds, and I kind of measured it at 6. And our input signal has a rise time of 15 nanoseconds. So this is just kind of for information only. And this is for a 1 kilohertz square wave going in, and I'm still using the unbalanced 3 input. In case you were wondering, the XP-20 weighs in at about 40 pounds for the 2 pieces. It draws about 150 to 300 milliamps of current when it's plugged in, and you can't turn it off. It's always on. You can turn the display off if you'd like, or you could dim it, but it's always powered on, and it's just one of those features. I'm not a fan of that, but that's the way it's designed. Also, the remote, which I did not have for this unit, does allow you to select which input you want, as well as adjust the left and right balance, and it does have a muting feature as well. When it mutes, it disconnects the outputs from whatever they're connected to. As you saw from the test data, the XP-20 is a stellar performer as far as how it did on the bench. I think the only preamplifier that did as well, or maybe a little bit better here and there, is the Macintosh C48, which there is a video on in episode number 118. I'm going to talk a little bit about the C48 versus this in just a little bit. For my listening test, I did connect this to my Wilson Watt 3 Puppy 2s through the Bryson 2B-LP power amplifier, and I listened to quite a variety of music, and the preamplifier is quiet. It does everything you would want it to do. I could see no flaws in it, other than I like having an equalizer or bass and treble controls at a minimum. It doesn't have any of that. That's why they make equalizers. But other than that, I thought it just did a great job. Now, as far as comparing this to the Macintosh C48, which were made around the same time, the C48 was less expensive, and you get a lot more for your money with the C48. It performs just as well electronically. You've got a bunch of different flexibilities in some of the controls and setting things up. It's got a 5-band equalizer. It's got moving magnet and moving coil phono input stages. It, to me, has a lot more features than the XP-20, and the XP-20 was more expensive at the time. So if I were recommending somebody on a preamp that wants to spend a little bit of money, I would recommend the Macintosh. I may be a little bit biased on that, but the Macintosh C48 would be my preference. However, if you want something that is just a good solid preamp, it would be the XP-20 if you can afford it, or maybe you pick up a deal on one. I'm not a fan of having a separate power supply and to have one that's always on. I just don't like that. Also, the trigger output in the back is terminals. It's not the standard little 1/8" stereo kind of phono plug thing that most triggers have. So this, maybe it gives you more versatility, I don't know, but it's not definitely a standard. But other than that, you know, it's a nice sounding preamp. It's built well, and you know, it's a Nelson PASS piece of gear. So one other little thing that I did, because I wanted to try it since I had everything set up, is that I decided to do an A/B test against my Carver C1 preamplifier between the XP-20, and I set it up. It doesn't take a lot of work to get it set up to be where they're the same, putting out the same output level at a couple different frequencies. And I A/B'd it for a good 45 minutes, and I really could not hear any difference between the two. So once again, my Carver still stands to hold up to most of the stuff that I've tested with, as long as I don't have the Carver on mono. So that's another story. The only time the Carver sounded a little bit better is when I put in the sonic holography button into normal, and it expanded the sound stage, and it was noticeable. So I would give the Carver the edge in that way. But just listening to them with the tone controls out on the Carver and the sonic holography out, I heard no difference between the Carver and this. So you can say I need hearing aids or whatever, but I listen to a lot of stuff. and definitely the Carver held its own with the PASS as far as just the sound to me. Anyway, that's kind of my take on the XP-20. If you liked the video, always give me a thumbs up. If you have comments or questions, please leave them in the appropriate place and I will respond. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, I hope you will do so to help the channel grow. So until next time, have a great day or night.